Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Going Beyond the Deal podcast. I am your host, J. Michael Fischer Jr. There's a conversation happening quietly behind the walls of successful businesses that almost nobody talks about publicly. A founder spends 20, 30, sometimes 40 years building a company. And somewhere along the way, the business becomes more than just income. It becomes identity, legacy, family security, and in a lot of ways, it becomes proof that the sacrifice actually meant something. Then one day, usually much later than expected, the founder realizes that something feels incredibly heavy. Their children may not want the business, not because they're lazy, not because they don't care, but because the thing the founder built to create freedom may actually feel like pressure to the next generation. And honestly, nowhere do I see that fear show up more than in succession conversations. Because this creates one of the most emotionally complicated questions in a business. What happens when the family business nobody wants to inherit is yours? Today, we're talking about how to separate legacy from obligation, why guilt creates weak succession plans, the difference between a child who wants ownership versus a child who wants approval, and what actually happens when the next generation says no. Because this isn't just a financial conversation. It's emotional, personal, and if handled poorly, it can quietly damage both the business and the family. Let's get into it. One of the biggest misconceptions about successful founders is that they fear failure. Most founders who've already built meaningful businesses aren't primarily afraid of failure anymore. They're afraid of irrelevance. And nowhere does that show up more clearly than in succession planning. Because when founders imagine the future, they often imagine continuity. My son takes over. My daughter carries this forward. The family name stays attached to the business. And it's not just because it's practical. Emotionally, it validates the sacrifice. Think about what many founders gave up to build their company. Time with their family, vacations, predictability, sleep, financial stability early on, freedom. I've sat across the table from founders who built incredible businesses, and you can almost feel the emotional weight when this topic comes up, because subconsciously, there's often this belief. This has to mean something beyond me. And the easiest emotional answer becomes, the kids continue it. But here's the reality many founders struggle to admit. Your children did not experience the business the way that you did. You experienced creation, ownership, vision, purpose, pride. They probably experienced stress, pressure, expectations, watching the business consume the family. That difference matters because founders often see the business as opportunity. Their children may see it as emotional gravity. And this is where succession conversations quietly become dangerous. Not because people have bad intentions, but because everyone is protecting emotions and they don't know how to discuss it honestly. The founder fears, if they don't want this, does that mean what I built doesn't matter? The child fears, if I don't want this, will I disappoint my parents? And a lot of times, everyone in the room knows that the alignment actually isn't real, but nobody wants to say it out loud. The founder pretends succession is settled. The child pretends interest exists. The advisors move the process forward until eventually the reality shows up, which is usually late. It's usually emotionally. It's usually very expensive. One of the healthiest mindset shifts a founder can make is understanding this. Legacy and obligation are not the same thing, but families confuse them constantly. A founder says, I want to leave a legacy, but what the next generation sometimes hears is, you are responsible for carrying my emotional identity. And that's heavy, because the truth is, legacy is not forcing continuity. True legacy is transferring values, and there's a massive difference there. The deeper legacy may actually be discipline, resilience, leadership, courage, generosity, vision, stewardship. The business was simply the vehicle that help build those things. And when founders understand that distinction, succession conversations become healthier almost immediately. Instead of asking, how do we make the kids take over? The question becomes, how do we help the next generation build meaningful lives using the values that this business created? That may include operating the company, or it may not. And this is where a lot of family businesses get stuck. Founders unintentionally attach love, pride, or approval to participation. Sometimes it's subtle. One day, this will be all yours. I built this for the family. I thought you'd want to continue what we started. It would mean a lot to me. Those statements carry a lot of emotional weight, especially for children who deeply love and respect their parents. Because now the decision is no longer, what career do I want? The decision becomes, can I tolerate disappointing someone I admire? An obligation creates terrible operators. People who inherit businesses out of guilt rarely lead with clarity. They lead with an emotional conflict. One of the most important distinctions any founder can learn is the difference between a child who wants ownership and a child who wants approval. Because early on, they may look identical. Both may work in the business, attend meetings, learn the operations. They show up consistently. They speak positively about the company, but the motivation underneath is completely different. Here are the signs someone genuinely wants ownership. They bring ideas without being asked. They think long-term. They solve problems proactively. They challenge assumptions. They have opinions. And most importantly, their engagement exists when approval is removed. That's ownership mentality. Now compare that to someone operating primarily for approval. They avoid difficult conversations. They say yes quickly. They mirror the founder's opinions. They struggle to make independent decisions, and they fear conflict. And from the outside, this can look like loyalty, but internally, it's often anxiety. And from a transaction standpoint, this matters more than people realize. Buyers can feel when succession is forced. They can feel when leadership conviction isn't authentic. A company cannot thrive long-term under borrowed conviction. Eventually, the founder exits. Eventually, difficult decisions appear. Eventually, identity pressure collides with operational reality. And if the next generation never truly chose the business for themselves, leadership becomes emotionally exhausting. Now, let's talk about the moment many founders quietly fear the most. The next generation says, I don't want the business. That moment can feel deeply personal. For some founders, it almost feels like rejection, not just of the company, but of the sacrifice, of the identity, of the dream. And honestly, that emotional reaction is understandable. But it's also where maturity matters, because the meaning a founder assigns to that decision will shape the future relationship. If the founder interprets no as betrayal, guilt enters the family system. If the founder interprets no as honesty, trust stays intact. And here's something important. In many cases, the healthiest thing for both the family and the business is honest refusal, because forcing uninterested leadership into a company rarely creates great outcomes. Sometimes the most responsible legacy decision is not keeping the company in the family. It's protecting both the family and the company from forced alignment. Many founders today are realizing something important. My children may inherit wealth without inheriting operations. And in many situations, that's actually healthier. So what does a healthy succession conversation actually look like? First, it requires emotional honesty before strategic planning. That's the part that many families skip. They immediately jump into tax planning, governance, voting rights, estate planning, equity structures. All of these are important, but if emotional clarity is missing, eventually the strategy starts to crack. Healthy succession conversations start with questions like, what do you actually want your life to look like? What kind of responsibility energizes you? What parts of the business genuinely interest you? What parts don't? If there were no expectations attached, What would you choose? Those are vulnerable questions, and founders often avoid them because they fear the answer. But avoiding the answer does not eliminate reality. It only delays it. And founders also need to separate emotional validation from succession outcomes. Your child choosing another path does not erase what you've built. It does not invalidate the sacrifices that you've made. It does not reduce the value of the company. Your worth as a parent cannot depend on whether your children replicate your career. That's an emotional burden no business transition can safely carry. At the center of every family business succession conversation is a question people never say directly. What exactly are we trying to preserve? Is it the company, the wealth, the family name, the founder's identity, the relationships? Because sometimes those goals align, and sometimes they don't. The strongest succession plans are not built on pressure. They're built on clarity. Clarity about desire, responsibility, capability, identity, freedom, and truth. Because ultimately, legacy is not about forcing your children to live your life. It's about giving them the foundation to build theirs. And sometimes the healthiest thing a family can hear is an honest no. And for those listening, if you're a business owner or operator thinking about how these kinds of decisions impact your business, whether it's growth, succession, planning, capital, or long-term strategy, those are the conversations that I have every day. So if you want a second perspective or just someone to think through it with, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation. And if you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with someone in your network who would benefit from it. Let's continue to build something meaningful together.